you have your Bibles, we'll be reading a verse from John chapter 14. John chapter 14 in just a moment. Let's remember the Lord always. Let's remember to spread the cause and to help hopefully bring those back to God who have left. And of course bring those who have not come into the fold. I've entitled this lesson, Attack on America. It actually goes back a few years ago. We have another attack going on today, right? It's a health issue, but I want to use the illustrations from 9/11 for a purpose, and that is to teach about fear. In a sense, we've talked about fear 2 or 3 times recently, and we want to do that a little bit more. And I'll probably just get through the early part of this sermon today, and next week we will finish it. But when we think about fear, when we direct our emotion to find an answer, that's a productive use of fear, isn't it? But so often the opposite is what is done. And panic becomes the way for many. Let's read John 14:27. Jesus said, "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Now, in one sense, that's not really possible, is it? But in the sense in which Jesus uses it, it is possible. We will talk later about some who have, some we would think have no fear, and yet they do have fear. They just point their emotions in a certain path. And that's kind of what we want to learn from it. And back in 9/11 or following it, you had the Martin Police Department in Tennessee. And they had got a 911 call about a white powder in a mailbox. It's a little town. Not much bigger than this one. Didn't have a big police force. I think 10 people all total or less. And they had all dressed in rubber hazmat suits, and they were out there getting ready to take that mailbox apart. And then they would have to put it in special containers and have it sent to the proper authorities. Well, they went through all of that. And about the time they were ready to really get involved in a more heavily way, well, here came the owner, or one of the owners, the lady of the house. And she said, "That's pesticide." People have been in a panic over a pesticide. Little police forces and little fire departments were not able to deal with those kind of things much. 80% of the fire departments in America, at least at that time, they said were volunteer. Volunteer. What do they know about dealing with anthrax? They didn't, not much. In fact, during that short period of time following 9/11, there were 2,000 calls to 911 in America about white powder or something whitish. And all kinds of fears and panics were spread. On a normal day, say our day, there's no calls about white powder, are there? 2,000 extra calls to fire departments, police departments throughout our nation because they had succeeded in causing panic. What is panic? Well, you're in a theater back when we could actually do that. You're in a theater and somebody yells fire and you're sitting there thinking, well, I may get trampled to death if I get up. But they're already jumping up and running. If I don't get out of here, I may burn to death. So you're afraid. And you jump up in panic like everybody else. Panic, that's what people like that terrorists were trying to do, wasn't it? Well, today we have panic about, something we might catch. COVID. We don't just reasonably deal with it many times. We're in a panic about it. Why? Because people, for one thing, they'll take the one thing that happens once in a million times and they'll blast that all over the TV and scare people to death, won't they? Panic. They succeed in what they want to do. They cause panic among the people. But God, what did he say here? Yes, he was talking to the apostles. But he's also some way talking to us, isn't he? Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. Not as the world gives do I give it to you. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. We are to overcome these things. And there are many things that we could look at and talk about that deal with some of these issues. It was about this time after what I just mentioned that white powder anthrax this time really went to Tom Daschle's office, right? And you had several events like that going on and more terror, right? Panic. That's what terrorists want. They want panic. Now, we don't have terrorists trying to do these things about COVID, but we have panic among many people, don't we? Yes, fear is a God-given emotion. It can be used for two purposes that we're going to be looking at. And today we will look at least at one of the aspects of this. But fear is a good thing. God put it in us. If we don't have fear, we touch a hot stove, we get burned, right? If we don't have fear, we do foolish things. In fact, somebody that has absolutely no fear, what do we call them? We have several names that we use, but foolish is one of them, right? We are to have fear. If you talk about military people, great military leaders, they have fear too. But we must take that emotion and use it in a manner that is effective for us, our family. We're not to be foolish, are we? That's part of what fear does. It keeps us from being foolish. But if we panic, then fear causes the opposite of what God planned. But if I'm about to back out of my driveway, that's the only way I can get forward, unless I back in, which I've never done, hardly. But if I back out of my driveway, then I'm concerned about pulling out in front of a car, right? So I'm careful. I look that way, and I look that way before I pull out. So fear of a wreck causes you to take the proper actions. So fear is something that God planted within us. And an exhaustive study of fear would take weeks or months. We're not going to do that. But this may be my last sermon on this for a little while. But fear is something that is a part of what God planned for us. And fear causes us to take the proper actions, such as pulling out of a driveway. Go uptown, turn right at the graveyard, and come back out. And you'll notice you cannot see around that graveyard. You got to almost pull onto the highway to see around the graveyard because it's higher and it's built up close. That's a danger spot. I don't know if they've had wrecks there or not, but you had to pull your car right up to the edge of the highway to see down that highway. That should cause a little fear and make you cautious, right? The right kind of fear. And we mentioned anthrax. I don't want to talk about anthrax this morning, but I do want to talk, as we've been saying, about fear. what is fear? What can we learn from it? What is reasonable? And what is unreasonable? And so we want to talk about fear from those angles. What is reasonable and what is unreasonable? And excuse me. When we think about what the enemy might do, fear can cause panic, as we've already noted. And fear, in that sense, is an ally, isn't it? Have you ever thought of fear as an ally? It's an ally because it causes us to take the right actions, to meditate and think about, what should I do? How should I deal with this? And that's what fear should do. It should not cause panic in our lives, as so often is the case. And again, I want to mention one more time about people who don't show fear. Well, not only do we call them reckless and foolish, we sometimes call them dead. Right? Dead. Because they don't take proper precautions that any sane person should take. So those things are important that we look at. So fear prepares us for action, the right kind of action, the kind of action that will cause us to have what Jesus stated here. He said, my peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. Don't be afraid. He's not saying don't have the emotion of fear, because that's automatic. You're driving down the road and somebody pulls right out in front of you, the hair on the back of your head will probably stand up, right? It's an automatic reaction. You have no control over that. But how you act, even under that condition, you can jerk the wheel and the result will be what? Probably a wreck. Or you can hold the wheel steady, hit the brake properly, not slam the brake, which might cause you to spin, but hit the brake. Well, I can't do that. Yes, you can. We can learn those things, can't we? Those are proper reactions to fear, and they cause us to act appropriately, or they should. But too often, that's not what we get. Emotions are powerful things, aren't they? Love is emotion, but we are to even love our enemy, right? We can control it. Hate is an emotion God gave us. We're to hate evil. We are not to hate people, are we? We're to love our enemy. Very opposite of hate, right? We see all kinds of hate in our society today, not just the hate, of people of a different color, a different race, but of those who differ on ideas. Some people hate people who have different ideas, don't they? Now, if those ideas cause evil, then we should hate the evil. And it's a hard step sometimes for us to make sure we only hate the evil and not the people, right? That's a hard step, but it is a Christian step. So again, we want to focus and direct our emotions. And that will cause us to take actions that are appropriate. The first thing we want to look at is harmful fear. There are two kinds of fear. Harmful fear, and we might call it productive fear. We'll call it other things. But harmful fear is detrimental for us, like in the panic illustration. It can cause these things because of how we handle it, how we deal with it. And actually, as I said, this will be, I'm sure, 2 lessons. But the second lesson, we'll get into quite a number of scriptures about these issues. which is what I normally do, but there are other things to consider. Fear is something, if improperly used, is dangerous, isn't it? And so we want to think about that, and if we don't address it and deal with it in our lives, then it's dangerous. It causes us to act in improper ways. It causes us to act in ways that are not reasonable sometimes. So we need to consider how we deal with fear. We need to consider it on a regular basis. You know, if you slip and fall, that's a kind of fear, right? Well, the other day when we had so much snow, I was leaving my office and going to another part of the building. I stepped out and locked the door, so I just kind of on the ice, stepped back in. As soon as I walked off of those rugs, I went flat on my back. Well, while I'm going down, I'm thinking, I need to keep my head off the floor so it don't bang the rest of my way the rest of my body does. I succeeded at that. I was lucky. You know? But if you panic, then you may get hurt under those conditions. So often what we do is panic, isn't it? We overreact, like the jerking of a car or slamming the brakes. Panic. You know, the greatest aim, going back to 9/11 illustration, terrorists, the greatest aim they have is to create panic. As we think about 9/11, many people didn't panic, right? They went up those steps, all those flights, and brought people out through the smoke and burning. You tell me they weren't afraid? I tell you they were. But they went in anyway, didn't they? And we honor them as heroes, and that they are. They're not military people. There might have been some, but I'm just saying, well, the point there was not about military, was it? It was about keeping control of their fear and their emotions and helping save others. If they had not, we would have seen, if possible, people jumping from great heights. And sometimes we see that in fires, don't we? People can do really dumb things under panic. And so if a terrorist can succeed in getting us to give in to panic, then they've done the biggest thing they want to do. I would say that even a disease, though it has no mind, if it succeeds in causing people to panic, well, we did see panic in the very early days, didn't we? Go to the grocery store, there's not a toilet tissue anywhere there. That's a kind of panic, isn't it? Here we are a year later, and it's still true. There's some there, but we still have problems with some of those issues, don't we? Because people panic because of their fears. Panic is contagious also, isn't it? It causes others to follow. It causes a chain reaction to follow. And it gets, for the terrorists, a bigger bang for their buck if they can cause people to panic. And we need to think about that and apply it in a multitude of ways. How do we deal with issues? Do we panic? Hopefully not. You know, panic could be from somebody that can split atoms, yes, but many smaller things cause our fears, don't they? And our panic too often. Back then, we heard calls almost daily about people calling 911. And so there was a concerted effort by the government to get people to continue their normal activities. They wanted normalcy. Well, that's kind of what some of our leaders want today, right? They want as much as possible to put some normality back into our society. But in this case, they wanted people who were in a panic throughout America many of them. They wanted them to think about what is normal. And they wanted to take it to heart. They wanted us to take it to heart and put it into practice so that fear didn't rule everything. When people are afraid, they become vulnerable, don't they? They become vulnerable if they're not careful. Panic is not limited to a national problem, is it? It can come in a multitude of ways. We've mentioned a fire, a yelling in a theater. Panic can come in a number of ways. In Matthew 25, in just a moment we're going to read that. Well, first we're going to read Exodus 14. This was a panic. Exodus 14. The Egyptians, or the Israelites had left Egypt. The Pharaoh had told them, go worship. He didn't know they were going to go for good. But I guess Pharaoh figured out they weren't coming back. So Pharaoh gathered his army, and in Exodus 14:10 and following it says, and when Pharaoh drew near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, so they were very afraid. There's a panic about to start. And the children of Israel cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, I think that would probably be better translated. They screamed at Moses. Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us out to die in the wilderness? This was a screaming fear, a panic. Why have you so dealt with us to bring us out of Egypt? Is this not the word we told you in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall see again no more forever. What's Moses saying? Well, the people were on the verge of panic again. They were on the verge of panic. They're screaming at Moses. Why didn't you just leave us in Egypt? Why are we going through all of this now? If we were going to die, it'd be better to die there. Back there, we had food and clothing and shelter and an Egyptian army to protect us. Now they're about to kill us. Panic struck, didn't it? We can distill that into 4 parts. We won't talk too much about it today, but here we have at least 2 to 3 million people. I mean, how many kids did each one of these families have? I know when you go back and study ancestry, you'll find that probably your families had 15 or 20 kids every generation. At least that's what I found in mine. 15 or 20 kids. So, what if we just limit it to 2 or 3? How many people were out there by the Red Sea? 2 to 3 million at least, maybe many more. And panic is striking. Fear is running amok. Yes, we have fear. We have fear in the present situation, don't we? Especially if you are our age. And even if you're not. Young people die too, right? So fear strikes the hearts of Americans. But should we live in panic? Here are the 4 things I think Moses said to them. Get a grip on yourself. You ever said something like that to a child? Or maybe a slap on the face? Get a grip on yourself. You're out of control. Number 2, stand still. Number 3, watch for the Lord to work. And number 4, keep quiet. Screaming and hollering, fears of all kinds are not good for us, are they? Not when they're out of control. If you consider that list carefully, you realize that those things are the very opposite from what people do when they're panicking. They do not get a grip on themselves and do what's reasonable. They do not stand still. They do not watch for the Lord to work, and they do not keep quiet. We'll look more at those in the next lesson and a number of other scriptures, including the passage in Matthew 25 that I mentioned. We're going to look at it under the question of paralysis. Many people are paralyzed with fear, aren't they? You ever seen somebody like that? They can't act, they're paralyzed by fear. Which is the opposite of what fear should do. It should cause us to take appropriate actions. So we're going to look at that some more, and it's part of that section we call harmful fear. God wants us in His kingdom. God wants us all in that kingdom. He gave His Son, as we remembered in the Lord's Supper, that we could all be in that kingdom, didn't He? And yet how many people take advantage of it? They either fear something, or they dislike something, or whatever keeps them from taking appropriate actions. We're going to offer an invitation. Maybe someone here will need to respond. Or if you're listening online to this lesson later, we encourage you to call the church here or to send me an email. We have all that information on our website. So if you need to respond now, won't you come as we stand and sing?
What can wash
Away my sin, nothing but the blood of Jesus.